asteroids?
Yes. One of several ways we will most assuredly go extinct is an asteroid that we discover too late and too late to do anything about. It reminds me of this comic. It may have been in the New Yorker. There was one dinosaur lazily leaning on a rock, and the other one comes up to him and says, "I'm saying now is the time to build an asteroid defense system." And the dinosaurs are just laying there all lazy, just kicking back in their Jurassic laziness. Yes, we should have a defense system in place at all times, and we don't.
Neil deGrasse Tyson has been our guest for the past 3 hours. His most recent book is called Astrophysics for People in a Hurry. This is Book TV on C-SPAN 2.
C-SPAN, where history unfolds daily. In 1979, C-SPAN was created as a public service by America's cable television companies and is brought to you today by your cable or satellite provider.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Barnes & Noble, Upper West Side. Tonight, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing authors Jonathan Allen and Amy Parnes. Jonathan Allen has covered national politics for Politico, Bloomberg, and Vox. He is the head of community and content for Sidewire and writes a weekly political column for Roll Call. Amy Parnes is the senior White House correspondent for the Hill newspaper in Washington. She covered Hillary Clinton during the campaign and will cover the Trump administration. They have written the acclaimed biography, HRC. Tonight, they bring us their new book, Shattered: Inside Hillary Clinton's Doomed Campaign. Through deep access to insiders from the top to the bottom of the campaign, Jonathan Allen and Amy Parnes have reconstructed the key decisions and unseized opportunities, the well-intentioned misfires and the hidden thorns that turned a winnable contest into a devastating loss. Michiko Kakutani of the New York Times writes, "Although the Clinton campaign was widely covered and many autopsies have been conducted in the last several months, the blow-by-blow details in Shattered and the observations made here by campaign and Democratic Party insiders are nothing less than devastating. Sure to dismay not just her supporters, but also everyone who cares about the outcome and momentous consequences of the election." So without further ado, please join me in welcoming authors Jonathan Allen and Amy Parnes.
Good evening. Thank you for coming. I see family, friends, and people we don't know yet. So there's my family waving over there. They must have been drinking already. They're laughing like they were. So I think what we're going to do here is read a little bit of one of the early chapters of the book, Chapter 7. And then we'll talk a little bit about what our process was, and then we'll take questions from everybody, or from anybody who has a question. Do you want to start, Amy?
Sure. We're going to read a little part of Chapter 7, which is a chapter that centers around Iowa. It's called, "I Was Certain We Were Going to Lose." Bill Clinton was pissed off. He hollered at John Podesta loud enough to be heard through the walls of the little anteroom he laid claim to on the 10th floor of the historic Savory Hotel in downtown Des Moines, Iowa. It was the goddamn pundits he was watching on TV. They were getting it all wrong again, as the results of the Iowa caucuses trickled in. Hillary was leading, but it was going to be tight. "OMG," Wolf Blitzer said on CNN. "It doesn't get a whole lot closer than that." That assessment invited parallels to Hillary's 2008 loss to Barack Obama. It was, in Bill's view, an absurd comparison. After all, that had been a three-way race, and she was still likely to come out the winner on this night, not the third-place finisher. But journalists saw an upstart challenger competing with her in Iowa, and déjà vu was a hard storyline to resist. The outcome tonight ensures that this race is going to go on for months and months on the Democratic side, Blitzer's colleague Jeff Zeleny reported that night from Sanders' headquarters. The perception all night had been that Hillary was such a prohibitive frontrunner heading into the Democratic nomination fight that she should have cleaned up easily. Bill had a much different perspective. Iowa had never been Clinton country, and Hillary had increased her share of the caucus return from under 30% in 2008 to 50%, give or take a little, in 2016. Plus, unlike Obama, Bernie was tailor-made for Iowa. The state is overwhelmingly white, littered with colleges and decidedly working class cities. Even if Bernie managed to eke out a victory, that was Hillary showing strength, not weakness. Why couldn't they see the difference? On one level, it was just another of Bill's routine fits about television personalities. He'd cursed Tim Russerd's name after the Meet the Press host had declared Obama the winner of the 2008 primary in May of that year. But it was another sign of his inability to tamp down his emotions at pivotal moments of his wife's political career. At the start of the day, he'd gone for a walk with his aides to release some of the building stress, and at one point he played Oh Hell, a combination of card games, spades, and bullshit with them. He was a protective husband and a concerned Democrat, and now he was shouting 8 years of pent-up frustration at his longtime friend and advisor.
When Bill had spent himself, Podesta calmly walked into an adjoining space that was part of the Clinton suite for caucus night. There, amid Hillary's phalanx of anxiety-ridden consultants, he found the man he was looking for, Iowa State Director Matt Paul. Balding, bespectacled, and in his mid-40s, Paul had left his job as Communications Director for Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack to run Hillary's Iowa operation. He had been with her at stops across the state for the better part of a year. Having served on Howard Dean's presidential campaign in Iowa and as a former aide to Vilsack and Senator Tom Harkin, Paul knew the state's electorate as well as anyone. Podesta beckoned Paul with a quick but pointed nod. "You go in there and deal with him." Paul gathered himself and walked in to find the former president sitting in a leather chair. Bill was wearing a suit and a pair of leather gloves. His arms were crossed. Even if the yelling hadn't been audible through the walls of the boutique hotel, it would have been clear that he was in a foul mood. His eyes were fixed on Paul. If there's ever a time to make sure I know my shit, the staffer thought, this is it. Bill fired questions at him. What's still outstanding in Polk County? What about Johnson County? And how about Cedar Rapids? Paul walked Bill through the state and where caucus results still hadn't been reported, county by county. Slowly, the president's anger subsided, even if his anxiety didn't. Hillary had gotten out to a lead consistent with where her team thought she would be heading into caucus night. She was up a handful of points, but Sanders was slowly closing in on her. After Paul briefed Bill, the two men repeated their conversation in the nearby room where the rest of Hillary's team was nervously assessing the situation. Even in front of the others, Bill bore down on Paul. One source in the room noted a marked shift in Bill's personality. Usually when you're with him, he's a storyteller, this source said. On this night, he was just an information gatherer. He wanted to know what the staff didn't know and why they didn't know it. It's much harder to figure out who's winning a caucus state, and particularly in Iowa, because the results aren't measured in votes cast. Instead, they're reported as the number of state delegate equivalents based on the proportion of the vote that each candidate gets from his or her performance at caucus locations. The numbers can come in as very small fractions. Over and over, Paul gave updates to the former president, or more often reports that weren't actually meaningful updates, but remained upbeat, if not rosy, about Hillary's chances of pulling it out. Paul concluded that what really mattered was which caucus sites in Polk County remained unreported. If they were in the core of Des Moines, Hillary was screwed. If they were outside the city, she would win. Pollster John Anzalone, who also knew the state like the roads around his Alabama home, looked at the state numbers, same numbers, and got a bad feeling. He back-channeled to Podesta while Paul was reporting to Bill. This is not getting better, he told Podesta. This is going to keep going down. He could overtake us. let me just say before we go any farther, we're really happy to have C-SPAN here. We love C-SPAN. They're sort of it's like local television for us Washingtonians. And we'd really like to thank Barnes & Noble for hosting us. We found out as we were walking in here today that this book showed up as #1 on Barnes & Noble on their website today across the country. So we're really happy to be here. And we'd really like to thank our team at Crown Publishing, our editor Kevin Downton's over there, along with Rachel Rakicki and Liz Wetzel, and many other people helped make this book possible. So we would be remiss in not mentioning them because they stand along the wall and cheer us on, and they're really responsible for a lot of what actually appears in the book. So I think what we thought might be interesting for you is we would talk a little bit to each other, kind of interview each other for a few minutes, and then take some of your questions. Did you want to kick it off, Amy?
Sure. I think this is kind of fun because even though John and I have worked together now for 2 books and 5 years, I think we still don't really. I have an idea of John's favorite moments and the inner workings, but I kind of don't too. So I figure we'll kick it off this way, and then we'll let you guys chime in as well. So maybe let's start off by talking about your favorite moment of the book.
So there was an interesting thing that happened on election night. You guys might have had a similar experience to us, which is that we were expecting Hillary Clinton was going to be the next president of the United States. And unlike us, I assume most of you were not well into writing a book about this election. And one of the first things that we discussed in the immediate aftermath of the election, I think there were a lot of people trying to get adjusted to the surprise of the election, to, of course, the transition. For us, we sort of had to make an assessment of what we were going to still had to go after that was from the pre-election period, from the pre-general period, and what were the things that we were really going to need to focus in on at the end of the campaign in a different way than we had before, because we had a lot of reporting from before the election, and then but some of the last month or two, we hadn't had a chance to really talk to folks on the campaign because they really shut down around the election. Nobody wanted any leaks out, so we were going to have to do all new reporting for the last month or two of the campaign, and then go back and get some things from earlier. And one of the decisions we made early was that we thought that it would be a tremendous failure on our part if we did not get a TikTok of election night, of what was going on behind the scenes in the Clinton campaign. And so my favorite part of the book, and the thing that I feel most invested in, is the effort that we went to really talk to a lot of people about what was going on. And we have sort of a 3 to 4 location TikTok of the Peninsula Hotel, where Hillary Clinton and her top aides were in a suite and some other rooms around it all night, a boiler room in Midtown Manhattan, where her data analytics folks and her pollsters and some of the people who were really crunching numbers and talking to people out in the states where they were all working. There was the Brooklyn headquarters, there were people there as well, and of course the Javits Center, where her victory party, or planned victory party, was. And we spent a tremendous amount of time trying to piece together what happened, putting together a TikTok, trying to get the time element, and there are a tremendous there are a lot of things in this book that have not appeared anywhere else. Amy and I were the first to report in late November, because we were afraid somebody was going to report it before the book came out, that President Obama had urged Hillary Clinton to concede when she was not yet ready to on election night. But there's a lot more of that story of election night, what was going on, what the feelings were, what the emotions were, what the debates were among her staff and among her family even. So to me, that's the part that I'm most proud of, is that we got all this reporting that no one else did about this really incredibly shocking moment for not only for the country, but obviously for the Clinton people, or not only for the Clinton people, but for the country as well. So what's your favorite part of this book?
Well, that, obviously, because it took a lot of work.
And what you're about to say, I should say, if you don't mind, every author's favorite part is the byline. So this is really the second part, the second favorite part.
No, it was great to actually. I think everyone wanted to know what was going on inside that room, so I would have to agree with you. I also, we wanted to know the real story. We wanted, obviously they kept trying to portray a joyful campaign, and we kept seeing signs that it wasn't such a joyful campaign. So John and I kind of made it a mission, I think, to get the real story from people. And, initially people would be like, oh, yeah, it's great, it's going well. And slowly, we started hearing the real story. And we were interviewing one source, actually, in the Brooklyn headquarters, because this story is about the people in the Brooklyn headquarters, mostly. And a source actually told us at the very tail end of the interview, yeah, there was one moment right after Michigan. She was really pissed off. But I can't really tell you anymore. You're going to have to talk to other people who were in the room for that. And I was so angry. I was like, come on, tell us a little more about what happened here. We want to know about it. And he was like, no, talk to some other people in the room. And I got him to tell us who was in the room. And he gave us these names. And we tried to make it a mission in every interview after that to find out what exactly went down in that moment. Finally, we circled back months later.
9 months later, we could have had children in that time. Love you, honey.
Finally, this one source, we said, come on, we really want to know what happened here. We kind of have bits and pieces of what happened. This was post-election now, wasn't it? Or no, it was before the election.
Post-election.
Yeah.
This was it was pre-inauguration, but I think it might have been after Christmas.
Yeah. So finally, the source tells us what happened. And basically it resulted in us finding out that she was really frustrated by what had happened in Michigan during the primary. She was angry at her aides. She was telling them, our message isn't resonating, what's happening here. These are the moments that make this book what it is. It's a real book about what happened, told through the people, not through outsiders, told through the people inside the campaign. And I think that kind of book, that kind of moment shines in this book, and this is what we aim to do.
Your turn. Truth or dare?
I want to know what you think the hardest part of reporting out this book was.
I think getting people in Clinton's orbit to talk about anything is impossible. And if I was to chalk up what are my proudest accomplishments just as a reporter, it's breaking into this circle and getting people to tell us stuff, because this is a famously, especially in this campaign, a group that was not leaking a lot, not talking a lot, very afraid of the repercussions of having leaks come back on them. That's something that we write about here, that Hillary Clinton was obsessed after 2008 with not having leaks. She believed that the leaks from her campaign had really hurt her in 2008, rather than seeing them as symptoms of some dysfunction or accepting that there were people who didn't feel their grievances were being aired effectively internally, turning to the outside. She looked at the leaks as something that was plaguing her campaign and one of the big reasons she lost. This time around, a lot of these people thought they were going to be working in an administration. A lot of them thought they would be working in the White House. There was a lot of incentive not to bring problems, not to air problems externally, and not to even air them internally. And so I think, to me, the hardest part was getting people to talk, and it really was unlocking person by person, detail by detail, going back to the same people over and over again, matching what somebody said in April with what they said in September, with what they said in December. And it was a reminder, the whole process, I think, was a reminder of the thing that reporters really know in their hearts, which is that if you want to get something good, you just have to work at it and work at it and work at it. And, I'm proud that we were able to bring to light so many things that people didn't know, just in terms of the basic story. You can agree with conclusions, you can disagree, you can look at things that are in this book and say, I don't think, their analysis of that is right, or I wish they'd had more about that. But at the end of the day, there is a ton of new reporting in this, and I'm so proud of that. And it was hard work for us, and I know my family sacrificed for it, and your family sacrificed for it, and so I'm proud of that. Now I want to know from you what your biggest fear is now that it's out, because we've been sitting on this finished product for a few weeks, waiting for it to come out, and then just to read you into the experience of an author. I think we can say this. I hope our publishers don't get mad at us. We heard that there was likely to be a review on Friday. The first review was likely to come out on Friday, and it came out before we expected it to, and it was really very good. But for weeks, you sit around with a finished product that nobody else has read. You don't know if anybody's going to like it. You don't know if it's going to sell. And it was just as hard to write, no matter whether those things go well or poorly. And so but now that it's out and people get to look at it, this finished product, like, what is your fear?
So many fears, but I want people to understand that we've gotten some feedback on Twitter and other social media that we're biased reporters, or we went into this basically we shoot from the hip. We were trying to tell, we're reporters. We wrote what some people thought was a largely sympathetic book the first time around. This one is basically what we saw, what we heard from everyone in the campaign. And so I kind of want people, my big fear is that this will be misinterpreted. And as we explained in the introduction, we actually went about reporting this. We thought, obviously, that she was going to win. And our reporting changed. It didn't change, but the direction didn't even really change, because we had seen signs of problems all throughout the campaign. But what happened was she lost. We had to kind of quickly we had to interview people and quickly form conclusions about what happened. And do that right after the election in January. And that was a really quick turnaround. And so I kind of want people to understand that process without judging how we did this, and whether or not we were taking sides and who we voted for. And a disclaimer, I don't vote even, because I feel like my reporting is my public service, and I don't take sides. And so, I want people to kind of judge this fairly and to kind of read it before they actually judge it.
If I could just add to that, I think and you were getting at this, before the election happened, we had picked up, as Amy was saying, on a lot of problems in the campaign, and we had picked up on some of the misery in the campaign, and we had picked up on Hillary Clinton feeling like she didn't have a handle for the electorate. And there are a couple of anecdotes in this book about her basically saying to people very close to her, I don't understand what's happening with the country right now. I don't get it. Which we obviously saw was a problem in terms of, in the Democratic primary and in the general election. And regardless of the popular vote totals, certainly she would like to have gotten a larger share of the popular vote, and certainly in the right states for the Electoral College. There was something that Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump were tapping into that she had a lot of trouble understanding. Part of which I think was her general belief. Not just general, but just very strong belief in systems and working inside the system to make change rather than breaking down the system to make change. But we saw all of this going on for months and months, her inability to really touch what was going on in the country and the dysfunction on the campaign. But it was weird to us because we saw the polls and we were like, well, she's going to win because we're looking at all the polling, and the polling not only says she's going to win, but with a pad. There seemed to be a pretty good pad there. And I hope I'm not talking out of school too much here. At one point, our editor said to us before the election, this book makes it like it sounds like she's going to lose. I'm having trouble understanding because it looks like she's going to win, and everybody thinks she's going to win, and you guys think she's going to win, but this book feels like something where she's going to lose, and we were like, yeah, that's a problem. We're going to have to figure that out. But we're like, look, we're reporters. This is what's going on, and it may be that these are forward projections of what might be difficult for an administration if she wins the president. We're struggling with that. And then on election day, she lost, and it was like we had seen all these signs And obviously it was close enough that election could have gone either way. So, any number of things could have tipped it one way or the other. But we had seen all these signs and not necessarily, and I mean, we trusted our gut in terms of just doing the reporting, and I think that paid off. And I think it's the reason we were able to produce this, fairly quickly after the election, because we didn't have to pull up a lot of roots and reformulate assumptions, because we just sort of laid out what the reporting was.
Okay, let's do one more quick question, and then we'll take.
All right, let's make this a lightning question.
Okay, what is your favorite quote from the book?
Oh, that's rough. My favorite quote from the book. You mean that somebody else said?
That someone else
Or
said.
like something we wrote that we think is so awesome?
The most powerful quote.
I'm sorry.
You stole mine.
Yes. Not only am I sorry, not only do I apologize for taking all this time. The longer quote is, "Mr. President, I'm sorry."
Yeah, I would have to agree.
I can give you another one if you want. Do you want
Okay.
to take that one?
Yeah, let's.
Oh,
do
actually,
one
no.
more.
What? I don't want to use that other one. People should get to that. They should.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry. Like Abbott and Costello or Dumb and Dumber up here.
Anyway, we'll open it up to questions because we want to hear from you all.
So I do have a Q&A mic here. Just raise your hand and I'll come to you.
Hi. I'd like to know if you have any theories as far as why former Vice President Biden didn't run. And secondly, I'd like to know how much influence do you feel President Obama had in, as far as who could challenge Hillary Clinton, if that candidate would have had a fair chance. And lastly, why do you think President Obama didn't pardon Hillary Clinton, and would have that made a difference?
Maybe I'll take the first question. You can.
You want to take the
One
first two, and I'll take the third.
From now on.
So Biden, let's go there first. We have I think if you talk to sources, and we did, about why he didn't run, it was bad timing for him. He needed to make a decision pretty quickly. His son had died tragically a few months earlier. He wanted to make a decision over the summer. The clock was ticking. His donors kept calling and wondering what was taking so long. He was really feeling the weight of that moment and the pressure. Finally, fall crept in, and he realized that he had to make a decision. Meanwhile, Secretary Clinton was boxing him in and doing things that didn't allow him to do what he needed to do. She had already taken many of the donors. Time had run out, and he was unhappy about it, and we report that in the book. He confided to advisors and donors that she was, quote, playing ugly.
That's a favorite quote.
It's actually one of mine. And he wasn't happy with it. I think they have a cordial relationship, but he was really angry at her in that moment for kind of doing what she did and keeping him out, especially when he needed time, and he needed time to grieve and make his decision. And especially now, he's not ruling it out. If you hear him in interviews, he's basically kind of leaving that door open, and I think he wants to run again. So I think he wanted to run then, but the timing was bad, and the actual decision making was not in his favor.
In terms of the pardon, can we just skip to the pardon? No, I'll just take the last two. Yeah. So in terms of President Obama, he wanted to remain neutral, but everybody knew, that he preferred Secretary Clinton, which I think prevented a lot of Democratic candidates from getting in, or at least prevented a lot of Democratic candidates from even thinking about getting in. Because why would you run against the sitting president's preferred candidate who already has all these superdelegates lined up for her? I mean, when people talk about her skills as a candidate, one skill as a candidate was clearing the field. And she didn't get Bernie Sanders not to run, but there were a lot of other Democrats who might have run for president who did not. And the Democratic bench is pretty thin right now, in part because there aren't a lot of candidates with experience running for president. As far as a pardon goes, no reason to pardon her. Jim Comey said that he wouldn't recommend a prosecution. He said a lot of other things, but he said he wouldn't recommend a prosecution. Donald Trump's not going to, I don't think, going to attempt to imprison his successor, no matter how much somebody dislikes what he does or compares them to tin pot dictators. I don't think we're at that point right now or anywhere close to it. So there's no reason to issue a pardon, and had he done so, it would have been a stain on both the president and on Clinton.
We've got a question over here. Go ahead.
Well, what can you say about the decision by Mrs. Clinton and her advisors to delete the so-called personal emails, and any consideration to the fact that there be potential backlash of being a cover-up of something?
So, I mean, I think this is a question in case people didn't hear, why she would delete the personal emails, those that were deemed personal from her private server, and whether there was any fear of a backlash. And obviously there was a backlash in terms of people saying that she was trying to hide something. The personal emails belong to her if they are in fact of a personal nature, and there was a process that was put together where her lawyers and top aides who are lawyers looked through these emails and determined what was a work email and what was a personal email. And I think having looked at her work email and having seen all of the information that was classified that ended up in her work email that was on the private server, it seems pretty clear that they didn't sit around going like, oh, this could be a problem, let's just delete it. Because if they had done that, we wouldn't have seen all that classified information. They're not stupid. They may have made a bad decision, bad judgment. In fact, I think it was an epically poor decision to set up that private server, and one probably motivated by the desire to not have her files out there in the open under Freedom of Information Act requests while she was running for president. That worked out very well for her, as you all know. But in terms of the personal nature emails, those belong to her. Those don't belong to anybody else. So there shouldn't be a problem with that as long as they're making a good decision about it, the right decision about what's personal and what's work.
Got a question over here. Go ahead.
Given what you know now through your reporting, if you had to pick one, would you say that the Clinton campaign lost or the Trump campaign won?
Both.
I think it's really complicated, and we've been getting that question a lot the last few days. I think, as John and I report in this book, and I think we do so pretty conclusively, it wasn't just Russia or Comey. It was a combination of factors. I'm not saying that for everyone here who thinks that Russia and Comey was the definitive factor, I'm not saying that it wasn't. I'm saying it was a contributor for sure. But there were other factors, including the fact that she didn't have a message from the beginning of her campaign. We detail in this book during her launch speech, she had more than a dozen advisors working with her to write this thing. None of them really understood the center of gravity of this message. They didn't understand where it was going. She brought in advisors from President Obama, a speechwriter, his chief speechwriter, to help write it. He actually threw his hands up before the process was over and said, I can't do this anymore because the speech is going nowhere, essentially. So message was a huge problem for her. There was infighting. There was infighting at the top levels of the campaign. Her two top advisors, John Podesta and Robbie Mook, didn't really care for each other so much. We detail this in the book.
That's a euphemistic way of putting it.
There's one passage we have in the book where they're at a senior retreat for senior members of the campaign, and they're basically telling each other how they feel about each other, and they're using words like passive aggressive. Hillary Clinton stopped talking to some of her top advisors, Robbie Mook, during the primary. These are all problems that were kind of swept under the rug. They weren't fully addressed. She wanted people to think that it was a drama-free campaign based on 2008 and the headlines that had come out from 2008 that there was lots of infighting. But they did a good job keeping it under wraps. But it was a problem for her. There was an image problem, a likability problem. People didn't trust her. These are all factors. When you talk to people now, John and I talked to someone tonight who basically said, I supported her, but kind of unwillingly. And I think that spoke for a lot of people that, inside, I think a lot of people acknowledge that.
I have a competitor for one of the best quotes from the book to support what you were saying, which is one of her top aides said, I would have had a reason for running, or I wouldn't have run. And the argument was essentially that even her aides didn't know what the rationale was. That they were unable to look at what she was saying and say, here is her vision for the country rather than her visions of power. And I mean, she'd been running for president for 10 years, at least. And I think an honest assessment is that it was very easy to see what Donald Trump's message was, whether you like it or not, whether he was being honest at the moment or not. You could tell what he wanted to do. He had a nationalistic message, he had an isolationist message, he had an anti-immigrant message, but there were basically 1, 2, 3 things that you could all put together and say, these are his priorities, this is what he wants to do with his power. With her, there was an embrace of so many things, and as some of the people said to us, if you're for everything, you're not for anything. And I think it was a harder message to carry because it wasn't very focused even after all these years.
Someone told, actually, to that point, someone told John and I, there was a wall in her Brooklyn headquarters that had little Post-it notes, and it said, Hillary is for, and the wall was covered with various ideas. And one of our sources actually pointed to that wall and said basically what John just said, that if you're for everything, you're not really for anything.
Yeah, I got a question. You guys talk about like Brooklyn, Podesta and Mook, and Trump had Kellyanne Conway come in late in the game, ran circles around them. Who actually, when you guys talk about Brooklyn headquarters, who was making decisions in Brooklyn and saying go to Arizona a week before the election, the Rust Belt's in the bag? Who, like Mook, Podesta, was it millennials didn't know what they were talking about? Who was making decisions for the campaign?
So the first answer to that question is your guess is as good as mine. No, this was a problem though that a lot of the junior and mid-level staffers were unable to get decisions rendered. Sometimes they were trying to get some sign off on something, they couldn't get it because Mook and Podesta weren't talking, things like that. But in terms of if you want to sort of look at what the basic debate was that really mattered in terms of the strategy of field operations and data analytics and how the sort of mechanics of campaigning, Mook believed heavily in the use of campaign data, and not only heavily but exclusively. He didn't look favorably upon those who look at politics as an art, including President Clinton, who believed that Hillary Clinton should be out there trying to persuade people who didn't agree with her. The data said it was more expensive, less efficient to try to get people who disagreed with her to vote for her than it was to get people who agreed with her to show up, which is true, by the way. Anybody will tell you that that's true. Typically, they don't abandon persuasion efforts entirely, and this campaign increasingly abandoned persuasion efforts, and as they abandoned persuasion efforts, they became more and more focused on the base, and they alienated. It looked like they alienated some of the people who might have been persuadable at one point, and particularly talking about working class whites. And this was a process, from the primary where she was so focused on turning out, with good reason, on turning out African American and Hispanic voters to win delegates, to win the nomination. You need to get to the nomination, you need to win the delegates, and her path was to focus heavily on urban areas and on African Americans and on Latinos. And so she goes to a city and works on turning out black voters and Hispanic voters, and doesn't go to the nearby suburbs or doesn't talk in ways that are trying to reach out to the voters she's having trouble with. And they become somewhat alienated, and you see that process, I think, particularly in the Rust Belt over time. There's no way to know what would have happened had they done things differently. But one of the sort of motifs of this book is that there was a big battle over the level of reliance on data versus say Bill Clinton coming in from the field and saying, like, these guys aren't buying our message. We need to spend more time with them, and we need to frame it this way. He'd come in and Mook would, essentially be like, well, that's quaint. You're great, Mr. President. It's awesome, but I don't want to send you out to a rural area where nobody likes her. I want to send you to a city where you can touch more people who are more likely to turn out.
And he was really angry about it, and a lot of the former president's aides were really angry about it, and still are. They kind of said, he had a better feel for things than this data and analytics that they were reporting back to him. So I think to this day, that's something that still kind of angers the people around him.
We've got a question over here. Go ahead.
Hi. Both of you referred kind of in passing to James Comey. And how significant do you think it was to the outcome of the election, the letter that he sent to Congress just before the election? And even though they kind of publicly downplayed it, what was the reaction to that inside of the campaign?
There was this saying in the campaign, we can't have nice things. Every time something started to go well, there was another shoe that dropped. It felt like there was a millipede running around dropping shoes, we go through the sort of background of that, and I don't want to tell a whole story here because, I want to get a few more questions in, but, basically they were shocked at what happened, and they were trying to scramble to figure out why the FBI director had weighed in again, and weighed in to say that he was reopening an investigation, and essentially he was looking at a computer that belonged to Huma Abedin, and they were like, the campaign was like, there can't be anything on there that we don't know about, because they got everything.
Her press secretary, actually traveling with her, when asked about it, thought that this reporter on the plane who was asking about these new revelations was joking.
Thought he was just being a jerk, like, hey man, you see the new thing from Comey? Really funny, dude.
Yeah, so they never saw that coming.
And in terms of how much of a factor he was in the election, I mean, it's impossible to know exactly. I would point out, though, that while Director Comey did a lot of unusual things, that's a euphemism. While he did a lot of unusual things during this campaign, all of what he was doing relates back to that email server. And, if there is somebody here who thinks that was a good decision on her part, both in terms of, how you should behave as a public official or a politically good decision on her part, please raise your hand. Right? I mean, so, that is self-inflicted damage, and it may be unfair and whatnot, but, we sort of look at that as part of the major own goal, to borrow a sports phrase, of this email server that actually came to light before she even announced the campaign.
Got a question over here.
Thank you. I'm a journalist with a newspaper from Norway. I have.
Go Norway.
I agree.
I have Norwegian relatives, so we're very pro-Norway.
I have to say, politics here are much more interesting than they are in Norway. I have a question about your access to the candidate herself. I mean, did you ever, or how much did you talk to her during the campaign, and to what extent did you feel that her staff was being guided in one way or another when it came to talking to you? Because obviously, you knew many of these people from before, from your other book, and they must have known that you were writing this book and must have had some kind of strategy in place to guide you in the direction they wanted you to go.
So that's a very complicated question. We don't talk about our sourcing at all. It's something we did on HRC. We're not doing it for Shattered. But you can rest assured that we've talked to everyone from the highest levels on down. This is a very inside the campaign kind of book. So if you want to know what outsiders are thinking, this is not the book for you.
I thought you were going to say we don't talk to the press.
The second part of your question is also complicated because, as John mentioned earlier, they're a tough nut to crack, Clinton world. We did this 2 times. Both times we felt
it was, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the second time was just as hard as the first, perhaps harder, because she was running a campaign and they were worried about what we were going to put out. We also had day jobs that we were doing at the same time. And it wasn't as easy as it might sound. Because we did HRC, it's not like the floodgates suddenly opened on this book. Quite the opposite. We had to work really, really hard. We almost had to kind of reintroduce ourselves to Clinton world in some sense. I used to joke with John, they act like they don't know us. And we've been working with these people now for years.
One of the nice things about some of the leaked emails from the staffers where we were able to see somebody being told not to talk to us because we presumably there wasn't a whole big reason. It was just like, yeah, you don't have to talk to them.
People that had spoken to us before were told
we're
not
given
to speak
red
to us.
lights, sort of. You're not allowed, don't talk to them, which is essentially like you're not allowed to talk to them. But I will say this, that there's a mix of that, and over time that seemed to ease, and some people talked to us and some people didn't. Some people asked permission to talk to us and got it, and some people didn't ask permission to talk to us and talk to us anyway, and some people...
John and I often joke that we want to write a next book on someone who's a lot easier and more accessible, because this world is not that.
like Queen Elizabeth or something.
Hey there, I'm a journalist from New York, and you guys were terrific on Channel 5 this morning.
Thank you, sir.
So,
hey, aren't
you Greg Kelly?
Right. From Fox. So, I'm about a third of the way into the book, and so far Hillary is indecisive. She's got very bad judgment. She's not good at politics, and she doesn't really stand for anything. You guys have a front row seat. Forgetting for a moment who's the president now, did you learn anything that told you whether she would be a good president? Because so far, all the things that she's doing in the campaign, she's not doing very well. Would she have been a good president, in your opinion?
I think someone else is applauding. Is that what you wanted to ask too?
With a Supreme Court choice that would have brought the women and the blacks and the working class and affirmative rich folks together. I mean, she seemed to have blown that completely.
So the one thing that we learned from HRC, our first book, was that she's a policy wonk. This is her thing. She knows how to govern. She knows how to govern more than she knows how to be a candidate, I think. She's not the best candidate. She actually admitted this several times during the campaign. She's not Bill. She has said she's not President Obama either. She's not even George W. Bush, who people say is quite charming.
Amy works hard, says really smart things, and I cut in with a few jokes. Everybody smiles and laughs, and then we get to go home, and they forget how hard she's worked and put stuff in. So I feel for her on that level. I think when people talk about sexism and misogyny in the campaign, I think societally we still have a lot of that, and that she is sometimes judged unfairly. However, your job as a candidate is to win over people, whether whatever their biases are, and that was a little bit of failure. And I didn't mean to. I did mean to cut you off, but I had a point that I thought was valid that I lost.
It's tricky, Greg, because I think that she's a terrible candidate. She doesn't know how to manage a campaign well. I do think she's very well versed in policy. We saw that in the debates. I think that inarguably she won all three. And I think that she would be good in that sort of way. I think that she would have a management problem for sure if she was in the White House.
And we do just have time for just to follow somebody who talked about Comey. Since 1991, Comey was the one who led the Whitewater investigation against Bill Clinton. And there had been a $91 billion industry against the Clintons, and specifically Russia started this untrustworthy Clinton campaign. So I think, what do you think? Because I think the press also contributed to that, since they were hardly ever asking, who's the president?
Donald Trump.
Thank you.
Did you just not want to say the words?
It's still very painful. I'm recovering. Never asked him about his service. Whatever he said just fell off like water off a duck back. Nothing mattered, and they grilled her left, right, and center. The Benghazi was a phony thing, and Gaudi himself was using a private server. So all these factors that you mentioned also do contribute, but I think there was a very concerted effort where in the last 10 days, when Comey went and put his thumb on the scales by bringing up this phony email thing, when he knew this Russiagate investigation, very serious level, with the top spies, was a connection to these people was going on. So my question is, didn't all these factors contribute towards her being very cagey and mismanaging and not having a specific message? Because I think in the end, her policies were not very well reported by the press.
I think if you wanted to find her policies, they were easy to find. I'd be hesitant to look at a campaign and say, wow, there's a campaign against her, and it was unfair that there was a campaign against her. When you talk about, we haven't talked about this before, but you talk about Russia. Here's an example of something we knew. We knew that the Russians had been trying to tamper with our elections. We knew that they were behind the DNC hacks. There was good reason to suspect that they were involved in the Podesta hacks. And Hillary Clinton made that case publicly. She did it in debates. She said to Trump that he was a puppet of Putin. She talked about the intelligence community, the 17 agencies that came in and said that Russia was responsible for these hacks and trying to do this. And the country elected Donald Trump anyway. It is not as though we had no idea what was going on here. And if people didn't pay attention when they were voting and they're angry now because they weren't paying attention, that would be one thing. But I don't think that's the case. I think that was baked into the decisions people were making. 1/5 of Donald Trump's voters said that they thought he wasn't fit to be president of the United States and voted for him anyway. And when I look at that, it says to me that even though this was a very close race and one that could have changed on just a little bit, it says to me that Hillary Clinton failed to win by a large margin that she could have, that there were voters certainly available to her if 1/5 of his voters thought he wasn't fit, that were available to her that she just couldn't nail down. Yep.
And with that, we do have to move to the signing. Are there any final comments from either of you?
Thank you. We really want to appreciate you all for coming and for a thoughtful discussion. We hope you enjoy our book.
Thanks.
This is Book TV on C-SPAN 2, television for serious readers. Here's our primetime lineup. At 6:30 p.m. Eastern, political satirist P.J. O'Rourke reflects on the 2016 presidential election. Then at 7:45, journalist and documentary filmmaker Chris Whipple examines the role of the White House Chief of Staff. On Book TV's Afterwards at 9 p.m. Eastern, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Helene Cooper reports on the life of Africa's first democratically elected female president. At 10 p.m. Eastern, Michael Whitmore, director of the Folger Shakespeare Library, offers his thoughts on Shakespeare's legacy. And at 11, we wrap up our Sunday primetime lineup with Andrew Carroll's recount of the life of General John Pershing, U.S. commander in Europe during World War I. That all happens tonight on C-SPAN 2's Book TV.
Not least, like many successful and effective humorists, he knew, as Michael has just explained, he knew how to win over an audience by laughing at himself. And so let's begin with a few more examples of this habit of self-mockery. For Lincoln possessed a very strong sense of self-worth. And as a result, he was able to take a joke at his own expense, joining in the jollity with the utmost innocence and good nature. He made much of his unprepossessing appearance, conscious of his very unusual physical proportions, his height, and more particularly his unusually long limbs, his long legs and very long arms. And aware that many considered him an ugly man, he faced that head on. Casting himself as the subject of the story, he related an encounter with a stranger in a railroad car who said, "Excuse me, sir, but I have an article in my possession which belongs to you." Taking a jackknife from his pocket, the man explained, "This was placed in my hand some years ago with the injunction that I was to keep it until I found a man uglier than myself. Allow me now to say, sir, that I think you are fairly entitled to the property." Lincoln's jesting also gave rise to a yarn that as he was splitting rails, he found himself looking down the gun barrel of a passer-by who explained that, and I quote, he had promised to shoot the first man he met who was uglier than himself. Getting a good look at the man's face, Lincoln remarked, having bared his chest, "If I am uglier than you, then blaze away." Lincoln loved the absurd. He loved tall tales. According to Noah Brooks, he thought that the chief characteristic of American humor was its grotesqueness and extravagance. He loved the story of Bill, the village drunkard. There are a lot of drunks in Lincoln's stories. A drunkard who got catastrophically intoxicated on a day of heavy rain, staggered down an alley, and fell asleep in a bed of mud. Waking as it was getting dark, he sought out the public pump to wash himself. On his way, he met another drunk leaning over a horse post, which Bill mistook for the pump and at once took hold of the arm of this man for the handle, the use of which set the occupant of the post to throwing up. Bill put both his hands under and gave himself a thorough washing and made his way to the grocery. As he entered, one of his comrades, horrified by the sight, exclaimed, "Why, Bill, what in the world is the matter?" "By God," he replied, "you ought to have seen me before I was washed." There need be no surprise that Lincoln, celebrated for the craftsmanship, economy, energy, and idiomatic colour of his prose, should have loved the humorous possibilities and curiosities of the English language. He discovered particular usages. He enjoyed discovering particular usages and the meanings of words. He smiled at the, as he put it, the Dutchman's expression of somebody tying his dog loose. He took delight in puns. He smilingly told the busy operators in the telegraph office that since it was a fast day, he was pleased to see them working so fast. He memorized the phrase of the satirist Augustin Dugin, "Endymion Hurst, whose head, unlike his books, is red." In court proceedings, Lincoln knew how to use a pun to advantage. An opposing lawyer who claimed that he could bring a man to prove an alibi heard Lincoln shooting back, "I have no doubt you can bring a man to prove a lie-by."
You can watch this and other programs online at booktv.org.
Here's a look at some of the best-selling nonfiction books, according to Amazon. Topping the list is Facebook Chief Operating Officer Sheryl Sandberg and psychologist Adam Grant's thoughts on perseverance, option B. In second place is Jonathan Allen and Amy Parnes' behind-the-scenes look at Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential candidacy, Shattered. Next on Amazon's bestsellers list is this weekend's in-depth guest, astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson, and his book Astrophysics for People in a Hurry, followed by Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren's thoughts on the current state of the American middle class, This Fight is Our Fight. And in fifth is J.D. Vance's recollection of his childhood growing up in a Rust Belt town in Ohio, Hillbilly Elegy. Our look at the best-selling nonfiction books, according to Amazon, continues with former Navy SEAL Robert O'Neill's account of his military career and the mission that took down Osama bin Laden, The Operator. Next, Diane Ackerman recalls the story of a couple who saved the lives of 300 Jews during World War II by hiding them in a Warsaw zoo in The Zookeeper's Wife. That's followed by David Grann's The Lost City of Z, which recalls a British explorer's search for an ancient Amazonian city. After that is HGTV's Chip and Joanna Gaines' The Magnolia Story. And wrapping up our look at Amazon's best-selling nonfiction books is Yuval Noah Harari's look at human history, Sapiens. Some of these authors have or will be appearing on Book TV. You can also watch them on our website, booktv.org.
KGB doesn't tend to just let people walk away, especially and stay in the United States. How did you, and I love this story, I mean, it's somewhat disturbing at the same time, but it's fantastic. How did you convince the KGB to leave you alone?
Okay, so I had to figure out, I wanted to make sure that they wouldn't come after me or possibly even do harm to my German family. So I was racking my brain, what do I do, what do I do? So eventually I needed to tell him that I'm not following orders. So I wrote a Dear John letter, and it went something like, Dear comrades, I have to